and hopefully you won't find any difficulties writing about this topic. But the reason why I tend to assign this topic in all of my introductory classes, so Introduction to Linguistics is also dealing with this, and the other English grammar as well, is that I've been doing it because a lot of the times when people sign up for this class, they have this they come with this particular idea of the study of grammar and the study of linguistics and what it is all about and how it's about, you know, speaking correctly and incorrectly, and you know, there being some set of rules set in stone by some language god, and those rules are representative of the language itself, and it's the rules that everybody who speaks that language uses in their daily lives, and it's the one that everybody should follow. So it's this black and white, this very reduced idea that many people have, that the sum of our language, or the most faithful representation of our language, is found in a dictionary, it's found in a language grammar book, it's represented by a language academy como la Real Academia Española or Oxford English Dictionaries in the UK, whatever, right? So it's this idea that we have with that we don't question certain things that were taught to us or instructed to us when we went to school and when we were young. So we took it as a fact, as a given, as, you know, this is the way, the only way, and the correct way. All right. So this film highlights the side of the coin that problematizes the idea that there is one grammar. Okay? There is not one grammar. There are multiple grammars that make up one language, umbrella language. Okay, so within the context of the United States, which is where this film takes place, the majority of Americans speak English, okay? But what is English? English varies according to region. English varies according to your socioeconomic group or your class. English varies according to your educational affordances or the education that you've been able to achieve, or the type, right? English varies according to the people around you and the type of English that they speak. English varies according to person and every person's individual experiences. So there is variation within a system, all right? And there are different grammars in that system. However, only one of those different ways of speaking, only one of those different grammars gets represented at large. Only one of them is chosen or reproduced as most correct, or as the one that we should all inspire to, essentially. So again, this film problematizes that. So the idea of why that particular English, but perhaps more importantly, what is standard English? Who made standard English? For who was it made, right? So in the history of the English language and the history of many languages in our modern world that we're familiarized with, como español, francés, italiano, whatever, a big important part of their evolution and development came with the advent of the printing press, right? Because when you printed language first and foremost occurs spoken, en el abstracto, spoken, right? then maybe it's codified or standardized into a set of rules. So meaning that for our society, we have an alphabet, we have dictionaries, we have language academies, we have schools that promote an idea or a visual idea of language. But there are many other languages in the world que no tienen alphabet, that they don't have schools, they don't have writing systems. For instance, a lot of indigenous languages have an oral culture and they don't have any written representation or schools or whatever. But for our reality, our linguistic reality, when we think about language and what it means to know a language, we think that knowing a language is not just knowing the sonido, morphology, syntax, semantics, but it's also knowing how to write it, right? We often tie the knowledge of writing as really important for us. So this film problematizes the idea that the English that is standardized in the United States, the English that is taught in schools, is not the full picture of English in the United States. It's not the English spoken by everyone. It's the English spoken by a select few. Who are those select fews that get represented in schools, in the government, in the entertainment industry? The powerful white, okay? So who gets excluded from representations in the media, in textbooks, in academia, in formal situations? Who gets excluded? Marginalized and stigmatized dialects like African American English, Latino English, English spoken by people from lower classes, right? So this film is about that. This film is about how there's really a lot of variation within a single English entity, but what we're taught in schools is only a fragment or a small percentile of the linguistic reality of the United States. Okay, so I'm going to share with you a PDF that's based on the film that explores a little bit further this idea of standard English and the exclusion of other Englishes in favor of one sole English, which is artificial, by the way. Artificial meaning that, you know, the set of rules was chosen by a particular set of people and then spread to society by institutions and books, okay? But everybody has an accent, and you and I are brought up and born with different ways of speaking. Okay, so exclusion, se llama. So this section discusses issues of language devaluation and exclusion that come from misconceptions of characterizing African American language as a collection of errors rather than a systematic language variety. Linguists explained several rule-governed patterns of African American language and some of the controversies surrounding the language. Okay, so again, this film touches on the standard notion of the standard, but not only that, it also has a big historical component. So it talks about the different social contexts that gave rise to African American English. So why does it exist in the first place? Because historically, as we know, African Americans have been discriminated against and excluded. And when you marginalize people from opportunities like schools and from professions, etc., when you have people isolated, people come up with their own ways of doing things and speaking, but it doesn't mean that it's incorrect just because it's not the language spoken by the whites, right? The white elite. It's just a different way of speaking. So why is African American English legitimate? First and foremost, because African American English has a system, tiene un sistema. It's rule governed, tiene regla. For a language to be a language, for people to understand each other, right? The whole purpose of language is to communicate. How do we communicate? When we understand each other. How do we understand each other? When there's a system in what we speak. When what we speak becomes predictable, maybe to a certain extent. What we speak is recurring. what we speak has meaning, okay? So African American English has its own set of rules. It has meaning. People understand each other when they speak it. People are born with African American English as a natural language from birth, okay? So linguist Arthur Spears, he shows up in the film, says all stigmatized languages usually have this false reputation. So stigmatized languages como que indigenous languages, African American English, Latino English, etc., have a false reputation in the United States of having no structure or no grammar. A lot of people say, it's a random, that's incorrect, that's incompetent, right? However, all language varieties, all ways of speaking need to have rules. They're rule governed. Otherwise, how would we understand each other? Our patterns have a system on multiple levels. What multiple levels are we talking about? Phonology, speech sounds. So they all have specific sounds. Lexicon, vocabulary. Como Puerto Rican Spanish, we have our own vocabulary based on Spain, indigenous languages, and our African heritage. Grammar, all of these varieties have grammar and pragmatic, so meaning attached to words and syntactic constructions. So the film specifically focuses on some grammatical aspects and features of African American English that could be viewed as mistakes and errors. Some of them are habitual be, habituale, cuando algo sucede regularmente. So habitual be. In this construction, you take the verb be, which is, linking verb. So instead of saying John is studying Saturday nights, to talk about a habit that John has. So John habitually studies Saturday nights. He is studying Saturday nights. We say instead, John be studying. So we mix be with ing, Saturday nights. And that's habitual. John be studying Saturday nights. Another construction could be John be sitting down right now. Okay? However, speakers would not use a sentence like this one because it's not habitual. Okay, so habitual means que sucede regularmente. So if we're talking about something that's happening right now, something that's happening right now is in the present. It's not habitual. Okay, so this is the sort of construction we would find, and this one we wouldn't find. Okay, so habitual. Another example is the absence of be. What is the absence of be? Well, be as a linking verb. So instead of saying he is nice and tying this noun to an adjective in predicative position, we get rid of this is and we say he nice. So this construction is also found in African American English, and we don't need this linking verb for people to understand it. All right, so it's the same way, I guess, if we were to think about it, that Puerto Rican Spanish gets stigmatized by speakers of other world Spanishes or speakers from peninsular Spanish as incorrect or a radical Spanish because it's so different from peninsular Spanish. And often what gets cited as less pretty or less appealing or even jíbaro or cafre or whatever, right, is what we do with our S's, right? Sometimes we don't produce our final S in plural form or ever. So, however, even though we don't produce the final S in un sustantivo, por ejemplo, que es plural, even though we don't, people still understand it as plural. Why? Because in our language system, we've developed alternative ways to communicating that we're talking about a noun in the plural sense. What alternative ways? Well, sometimes we add una H en vez de esa S, or if that S is omitted, maybe it's because the article behind it, el artículo behind it, or the sentence already gives us an idea that we're talking about multiple things or several things. so that that S is really redundant and we don't actually need it. Okay, so we drop it. And that's okay because people still understand and there's a system to it, right? So in the same way, absence of B happens in African American English, and it doesn't mean that it's less correct. It doesn't mean that people are less competent linguistically or in terms of communication. It just means that it's a different way of speaking that developed from, you know, people engaging with one another and not necessarily with what is deemed as prestigious or most correct or whatever, right? So other common grammatical pronunciation features that happen in African American English is the present tense. So presente, third person S absence. So they also get rid of their S's. So third person singular, she, he. Usually in subject verb agreement, si queremos agreement between your subject and your subject is third person singular, your verb takes the morpheme S. Remember, we said this. However, in African American English, they can drop that S and say she walk. En vez de she walks, to talk about somebody walking in the present tense. But guess what? It's still understood as present tense, with or without the S that is used in standard English, with or without this S. So because it's still understood, it's still grammatical, it's still legitimate, right? Here are other examples of features. Possessive S absence. So when we want to indicate that someone or something owns something else, we use apostrophe S in standard English. But African Americans, they drop that S sometimes. So man hat for man's hat, Jack car for Jack's car. And they still understand each other. Other examples, general plural S absence. So just like us in Puerto Rico, they can also drop their plural S and so on. There are many different examples. So let's read this bit on language ideologies. So this film is ultimately not just about the differences in Englishes in the United States. It's not just about the English in the African American community as legitimate or as rule governed, right? But it's also ultimately a film about linguistic discrimination, right? And language ideologies. So it's important that you know that this kind of discrimination exists in the United States and in the world, because oftentimes when we talk about people judging someone else, we usually talk about this judgment happening on the basis of how somebody dresses, or how the color of somebody's skin, or their social background, so their schooling, family name, whatever. But what gets less noticed or less cited is discrimination that happens on the basis of how we sound, how we speak. It's actually quite subtle and difficult to prove in a lot of cases, but linguistic discrimination is a reality of our world, all right? So, for example, right now we're just talking about the United States, but we could be talking about this within the context of Puerto Rico. But this film is within the context of the United States. So what populations face discrimination? Anyone that basically doesn't sound white, and not just white, middle class, right? So anyone who doesn't represent that desired group is seen as less than, okay? So really, it's the idea that standard grammar, which is the grammar that we're all taught in schools, is actually based on the language of this select community or group. It's not based on the language of the working class. It's not based on the language of the linguistic minorities. It's based on the language of the privileged, of the elite, of the academic, okay? And because it's set in stone or written, a lot of people then get this idea that because it's written, it's superior. Because it has a textbook representation, it's somewhat more real than something that doesn't happen in a book. Okay, so let's go to this definition. So it talks about Walt Wolfram. He made the film. He says that people have the impression that African American English is nothing more than a collection of errors because that's how they've been socialized. Socialized, socializar, significa una terminología to talk about how you were brought up. So you and I have all been socialized or brought up differently according to our background and our families and our family values and the education that we received, right? So basically what it's saying is that African American English is seen as a collection of errors because that's the way a large majority of Americans have been brought up, con esos valores, with those values, those ideologies, right? That African American English is incorrect or even funny. That's why we see it a lot in comedies, or that's why sometimes people who speak standard English style shift o cambian de acento African American English when they want to come across as funny, even though it's not their English. Okay, so if it's not standard, it's wrong. And this is an ideology that we're all brought up in. Si no está en un libro, si no está en la escuela, if it's not what the teacher's doing, it's wrong. It means that you're not intelligent, you're not competent, etc. So we have this framework, or this ingrained in our mind, in our cognition, that all of us have been indoctrinated into from the moment we enter school, very young age, okay? Nobody's getting a class where we talk about different dialects or linguistic differences. We're all getting the class that there only exists one way of speaking a language, okay? So there is a right and a wrong in language, un blanco y un negro, un good and a bad. It's almost like reductionist, when in reality, language itself is always right. La realidad es que el idioma is always correct. Why? Because language doesn't exist to be pretty. Language doesn't exist to be written. You know, it is written in our side of the world because that's how we developed, that's how we evolved, and it has its uses. Standard grammar has its uses, right? To have this universal codified way of speaking that facilitates other people from learning that language, like second language learners. They are able to learn English because it's in a book. So it makes things simple, yes, but it's not the full picture of a language. That's the important thing, okay? So language itself is always right because there's always a system in any grammar, in any dialect. There's always a pattern. That's how we understand each other. People are socialized to accept many beliefs as common sense without question or explanation. So a lot of the times people say, no, porque el idioma, porque sale en la escuela, en los libros, because that's the most logical one. That's the one that most people will understand. Not really. There's nothing that makes a language simpler than another language, nada lógico. It's all ideologies. So these unchecked common sense assumptions are called ideologies. Anything that, you know, you think, no, porque es correcto. Ajá, porque. Ay, porque sí. Ajá, why? Porque está en un libro. Ajá, why? O sea, if you can't bring it back to science, to our human biology, to something linguistically specific, it's an ideology, okay? So existing dominant systems and media representations reproduce these ideologies of what is desirable and what is less desirable. So if we say that standard English, the representation of our language is the most beautiful one, you know, then we have media, como the news, movies, whatever, they reproduce these ideologies. right? So they ask their newscasters, or we ask our government institutions or our lawyers to speak this prestigious way. Okay, so certain language varieties, because they're represented in these prestigious institutions, are then ingrained in our mind as good or desirable and right. While others, meaning the ones that we don't see in these institutions, are wrong, bad, alternative, como que, uy, un dialecto. This is the language, the other ones are dialects. But what you need to know is that even standard, what is considered standard, is also a dialect. And not only that, it is a powerful dialect because it has all of these different platforms that represent it, okay? But the reality of a language is that a language is composed of many different dialects, many different varieties, one of which is the standard variety, okay? And that's the powerful one that we see schools follow and we see foreigners trying to learn because it's the one that exists and it's codified. So that makes it simple. That makes the distribution of that language or that system simple, or more como que more that you can achieve it, right? Because it's written. So schools often teach that there is one correct grammar and anything else is automatically labeled as a mistake or error. But what you need to know is that it's, this way of thinking is reductionist and not really inclusive. Rather, it's actually exclusive, and it's just promoting a group of people further and further and further. This is not to say that having a standard grammar or having standard English is wrong and that we shouldn't have standard English. Oh, no, no. We should have a standard. Why? Because having a standard has allowed foreigners to be able to tap into a foreign culture or learn a foreign language, right? So that we can communicate with people from the outside, and people from the outside can learn more about us, right? But also because a lot of the times we can share ideas like science and whatever and have other people understand if we follow a particular set of rules. So having a standard is really useful for many different reasons, right? But the important thing here that this movie highlights is that just because we have a standard and it has its uses shouldn't mean that we exclude people or we discriminate people for sounding different to what is represented or what we teach. Okay, so this is the whole idea of this movie. It's not saying that standard English is bad, but rather saying quite the opposite, that standard English is good. There's a reason why we have it. However, we have to take into account that it's not the linguistic whole picture. It's not the whole picture of a language. Standard English does not equal to a language, but that there's different dialects and there's different varieties, and standard English is one of them. And it's the most powerful, right? But it's one of them, all right? So again, also something else that's really important that's mentioned in this film is the idea that many people in disadvantaged communities are excluded, not just in the representation of a language. So for instance, in the construction of what is considered standard English, again, we said it's based on the language of the privileged, of the elite, of the white, male, academic, okay? But not only historically is it based on a particular group, but also currently, not many people get access to standard English or to this kind of quality education, or to, not many people have the opportunity to become fluent in it, okay? So how can we explore this question a little bit more? What do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is, again, we said, well, in the United States is highly segregated, and there are different opportunities, and a lot of the times the opportunities are based on your class and on your ethnic and racial background. So what tends to happen, for instance, in terms of schools and schooling, is that people from ethnic minorities like African Americans, Latinos, whatever, and white lower working class people, they get access to perhaps a public school that doesn't have the same facilities as would a public school in a more prestigious region with more resources and a smaller teacher-student ratio. A teacher can cater to the linguistic and academic needs of her students versus the public school teacher who's overwhelmed with students from disadvantaged backgrounds or, you know, who have different communicative needs. All right. So there's a lot of inequality in terms of education in the United States. So because there's a lot of inequality, what happens is that not everybody acquires literacy or becomes literate or fluent in the standard or in academic English the same way. All right. So not only is it a language that was made for a particular group, but the people belonging to that particular group are most likely to speak it and hold on to it, como que hold the ball. And the people from a lower group or from a group that's not represented, not only do they not speak it, but it's also a lot harder for them to attain that, okay? So the film touches on these ideas as well. So what is standard English? Standard English is difficult to define. There's no singular standard variety. Rather, the United States has its own based on whatever it's taught in schools and academics say, right? But the United States, they don't have a language academy. So no tienen una Real Academia Española. There's no Academy of English to decide what the standard is. So in the United States, who decides what gets taught in schools? Well, academics, linguists, language teachers, people in English language education, and whatever they say goes, and it's upheld, it's represented in books, upheld by dominant groups who get access to university level education and also good public schools and private school education. So they uphold it, and because these people speak it, everybody else thinks that it's proper, correct, good. It's the way that you and I should learn how to speak. Basically, if a person's language does not match on to what this dominant group speaks, basically they're wrong. But if a person's language doesn't have any stigmatized features, so it doesn't have any aspects of language with African American English or Latino English or working class English, if it doesn't have anything that represents less desired groups, then their way of speaking is considered standard. Okay, so the idea of standard English is very discriminatory. Although it's useful, it's still exclusive. Okay, so you can read more about this film. I'm gonna share this PDF with you guys so you can read more about it in your own time. But I'm also gonna share now the essay question prompt because it's important for you to know the topic that you will be discussing. Okay, so this week, you're meant to rewatch the film and familiarize yourself with some of the ideas that I spoke about so that maybe you see the idea of standard rules, standard language, standards, language schools, people in power, and what makes a language correct, what makes a language better than another language. Is this something that we can talk about in a scientific way? How do we decide what gets into a dictionary, what gets codified, what gets standardized? How do we decide it? Who are the people behind this decision? What evidence are they basing their decisions on? What are the speakers that they're basing their decision on? So question prompt, this is your essay question. So you are to write an analytical essay about African American English, so a critical essay based on the main idea of, is African American English, after watching a film, a legitimate variety? ¿Es legítimo? ¿Sí o no? Okay? Give the reasons why. So some of the reasons why you can talk about the role of language in their culture and their identity, how they're brought up from birth speaking that way, how it's a system, it has its own rules and constructions, how it has different dialects, etc. The film also goes on to mention the role of African American English in the entertainment industry, todo eso, and the performative role of language as well. You can write about that. So why yes, why no, you cite the reasons. If you think no, te puede ir en el viaje de whatever, right? But make sure that if you say no, your reasons are scientifically valid. Que no sean based on ideologies, because if they are, then you're not writing a critical essay about it, right? You're just writing your opinion. And I'm not interested in opinions here. I'm interested in research and linguistic fact. All right. So what linguistic prescriptive ideologies propagate the idea that it's not legitimate? So we spoke a little bit about some of them, you know, how language ideologies are based on ideas of good and bad. And a lot of the times language ideologies are really deep down, no son ideología del idioma. Language ideologies at the end of the day are actually ideologies about the people who speak that way. Okay, so you can talk about prescriptivism. We spoke about that at the beginning of class. So what ideologies, how can we change these ideologies? So this could be a little bit for the conclusion. How can we change that? So how does the structure of an essay work? Well, basically, you know, like any other essay, aquí dice 600 to 900 words. I would want an introduction, a body, conclusion, ¿verdad? In a really simple, dumbed down way. I have a rubric for you as well. Let me see if I can share that with you now. One moment while I open it. You know that when you write your essay, you also need to have a thesis statement that talks about what the essay is about. And hopefully you also follow some kind of format. So a lot of you are probably schooled in MLA. I don't work with MLA, but if you work with MLA, that's fine. Maybe some of you know APA. My field works with APA. I will share some links today about this, and Wednesday's class is about this. So if you don't know about MLA or APA, fear not. We're going to talk about this on Wednesday. Let's look at the rubric. All right, so this is a sheet that I'm going to be sending you guys. Can you see it? Yes, cool. Thank you. All right, so student name, your ID, title of your essay, y aquí yo pongo grade, this is for me. So essentially you'll be graded on structure. So does it follow the body of an essay, or is it just random thoughts that you're just answering word by word the questions? If it's the latter, this is your territory, sepan pa abajo. If it's structured with a nice introduction about, well, you can start with talking about standard English or the idea of standard English, and that then kind of make that background, and then start talking about African American English, and then answer the question in your thesis statement. Okay, in this essay, I'm going to argue for or against legitimate variety for X, Y, and Z reasons, ¿verdad? To argue your arguments. So you know that in a thesis statement, you have your main idea followed by arguments. So it's your, basically your stance or your topic, stance es tu opinión, pero not really. It's your informed opinion with evidence. No es como que I think this. So your topic, your stance, I'm going to be talking about this in less explicit ways. And African American English is a legitimate or is not a legitimate variety because of X, Y, Z, right? And then in your body, After your thesis statement, which is in your introduction, where you write a little bit about the topic in a very general way, then your body is reason X, razón X, evidencia, razón Y, evidencia, right? That's your body. This is your body, right? In a very narrative style. And then your conclusion, you can talk about, the nice idea. How can we change these ideologies, or should we change them, right? So that's how more or less it could look if you were to follow a nice, clear essay structure, right? So structure, content, contenido, que no sea superficial, not superficial. I'm not looking for your opinions of good and bad, correct and incorrect. Ew. Please don't use those words unless you're talking about them from a critical perspective. One moment, please. My computer is gonna die soon. I'm gonna look for a charger. Me siento raro. All right. Coherence of argument. So content, I want a critical analysis. So not just saying don't say your opinion. I don't care about your opinion unless it's sustained by evidence. So you can say, I will argue for this or whatever based on this evidence. Coherence of argument, make sure that you've drawn a sound conclusion or an idea. Your thesis statement makes sense based on clear evidence. So it's not just evidence ahí de Wikipedia or things that really don't make any sense. Independence of thought. This is really important. And I'm gonna highlight this. So this basically, esta nota, the independence of thought, has all to do with plagiarism. So essentially, if you're copying word by word what somebody else said, está aquí en F. Wholly descriptive, not your opinion, somebody else's, right? But if you're in the A territory, you're showing a capacity of critically engaging or thinking in that topic, and even coming up with new solutions or new ideas that weren't even in the film, all right? You generated additional insights, B or A. You want to be in this territory, not some. Made use of relevant literature. I'm not too picky about this. If you just use the film and some of the handouts, maybe you explore some university websites or articles, that would be nice, pero, the film and the handouts are okay as well. Just make sure that when you are citing the film or when you are citing a material, that you follow a formatting guide. So MLA or APA, which we're gonna talk about on Wednesday. Presentation. So basically, does it follow academic English, standard English with punctuation and all that stuff? That's important, even though we're kind of talking a little bit against it. But again, that's important because then I understand it. All right? So that's your rubric. It's going to be uploaded. It's going to be on African American English, your essay assignment. And this question is going to be uploaded right now to your portal. Do you have any questions on the movie? Or so essentially I'm going to give you, okay, so I haven't said this yet. So this week you're working on your essay, and on Wednesday I'm going to be talking about formatting guidelines. Next week you're going to be assigned a writing buddy. So essentially by next week it is hoped that you have written something or you've written your essay, and you will be assigned a peer review buddy. So by the time we reach the 9th of October, again, next Friday, You should have your essay finished. And at latest, your essay should be finished by that Sunday at the latest. Pero the 9th of October is your deadline. So this week and next week, we're working on it. So you can start writing it this week and looking for your information and maybe rewatching the film. And next week, you're working on Monday and Wednesday with your writing buddy. And then Friday, you're expected to submit it. All right? Any questions? So I'm gonna upload the deadlines. Okay, no questions, Cindy. Any questions? It's really important. No? Okay, so if there are no further questions, watch out for my uploads, the handouts, and the rubric. And good luck. If you have any comments or ideas that you want to pass by me, like, Professor, I think I'm going to write about this, or does this look like a legitimate source or whatever, you can email me. You can WhatsApp me. Okay? I like how Giancarlo, yeah. Well, technically it's Friday, but I said at most Sunday, but technically Friday, you should have it done by Friday. But if you don't have it done by Friday, pues the last moment, Sunday. Okay? And you won't get penalties if you handed it on Sunday. Okay? Yeah, of course. Yeah. So on Wednesday, I'm going to teach you how to cite from APA and MLA the film, because there's a specific way of citing films. So we'll talk about that, how to cite films, how to cite handouts and articles. Okay. So if you have any other questions as well, you can ask me on Wednesday. So you don't have to have the questions now. You can just look at the PDFs that I'm going to upload today. Then si se te ocurre algo, you can ask me. Okay? And I hopefully as well by Wednesday, I will be able to answer some of the questions with regards to your test. All right? All right. Well, have a good day.